Hello and welcome everyone to another session by the product folks. I'm Aditya and I have Shalini with me to host the event tonight. Thanks for joining in on a Friday night. We hope to make it worth your time. We have an exciting session lined up, but before we jump into that and introduce our speaker for today, just a quick intro about TPF and Amplitude for all those who are attending our events for the first time. The Product Folks is a volunteer driven community for product managers, marketers, designers, and basically everyone interested in product. Apart from conducting such events and workshops, we also have a bunch of initiatives for product enthusiasts. If you're looking to break into product management, we have Insurjo coming up, which is a free product management program for anyone to learn and break into product management. And it's the last week to register, so make sure you check that out. We also do monthly product tear down sessions and have tons of resources on our website. So whenever you're looking to learn, just visit there and you'll find something that interests you. For this event, we have partnered with our friends at Amplitude. It's the market leader in product analytics, and rightly so. I personally loved using it across several products. In fact, I have like multiple Amplitude tabs open in my window right now, and I'm sure that's the case with almost all the PMs who use it for measuring success of their products. It's the best tool out there to measure engagement, retention, and optimizing your product in all sorts of ways. If you're new to analytics or exploring a tool for your product that fits your needs, I highly recommend you check out Amplitude. They have a product demo as well and a generous free trial that you can make use of to get started. And we'll put the links in the chat so you can check that out of the event. With that, I would like to hand it over to Shalini to introduce the session for today and our speaker. Shalini, over to you.
Thank you, Aditya. So in this session, you'll get a deep dive into importance of being a product-led company and what that means, questions a company should ask itself regarding the attention, productivity, and transaction. And Justin will also be discussing some real-world examples of leading brands that do data-informed product strategy well. So, coming to the speaker introduction for today, Justin is a product and analytics thought leader who has experience scaling organizations from startup through scale up. And Justin has previously also worked as an engagement manager at McKinsey, where he specialized in consumer facing industries with focus on topics such as pricing, product development, marketing, and e-commerce. And he was also the founder of Rivalry Games, which was acquired by U42 in 2015. So I'll hand it over to Justin. The stage is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Shalini, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, product folks, for hosting me. Definitely really excited about the session and everyone here today. I think it'll be a really fun discussion. It's something, this is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, how to use data to create your product strategy. But yeah, before we dive in, we can go ahead and quickly introduce myself. So yeah, as Shalini mentioned, like many product leaders, I've had quite a varied career and journey to my place that I'm in right now. And I actually started my career as an econometrician and then was thinking about how to apply many of those learnings to the world of business and then ultimately product, which is what led me to be the first exec hire at Amplitude, where I've led our product team for about 6 years. Now. And so one of my goals actually for today is for all of you to kind of walk away with a better understanding of how to use analytics to create a data-driven product strategy. And I think this is a really important topic because as product leaders, I really think we're at an interesting crossroads in the evolution of our practice. I think a lot has been written about the art of product development. And it's not to say that intuition isn't important in how we make product decisions. It clearly is critical. But I think if you're just relying on intuition, then you're eventually going to get disrupted by those who are applying both the qualitative and the quantitative together. And I think as product leaders, we really need to do both to survive and thrive in today's environment. And so today is really about how do we bring both of those together? And to really highlight the importance of this, I'd love to engage us all in a short history lesson And hopefully people can use the chat. So the question here is, how long do you think it took Facebook to get from its first million to 10 million users? Any guesses as to how long people thought that took? Yeah, go ahead and throw them in the chat. So for Facebook, it took them 2 years. Now, at that time, that was very impressive growth. I think at the time it actually was the fastest user growth for a company to actually go from 1 to 10 million users. But let's compare that to a modern day example. So I'm going to guess there might be a couple people who've used Clubhouse here. They were definitely all the rage back earlier in the year. And so how long do you think it took them to go from 1 to 10 million users? So go ahead. Yeah, if you got any guesses, throw them in the chat. For Clubhouse to go from 1 to 10 million users, and the answer there is 1 month. So that is how fast an industry can shift in today's product-led era. Now everyone's trying to copy basically what they're doing within the social space. But the thing is, this is not just happening in social. We're seeing these kind of shifts occur in B2B, in automotive, in media industries. All are being disrupted by companies that create innovative product experiences that customers love. And so the question is, how do they do it? What can we learn from them? And so this is something I study a lot to really understand how the best companies in the world make amazing products. And so we're actually going to start with what they didn't do. So I can tell you some of the things they didn't do. So one of the things I know they didn't do is meticulously walk through Porter's 5 forces analysis. I have an MBA, so I can make jokes about that, but that's not where they started. I can tell you they didn't spend hours staring at NPS results. And I can also tell you they didn't hire McKinsey to come in and figure it out for them. Nothing wrong with McKinsey, like I said, but if you really want to figure out your product strategy, right, it really comes back to actually being something that what we call at Amplitude, the concept of being product-led. And instead, what we've really seen is that the most successful businesses today really think about how to use their product as their competitive advantage. And like I said, this is what we refer to as being product-led. And we see that there are 3 things that all product-led companies do. And so the first is that they set a vision that creates clarity by using a clear and measurable North Star. The second is that they set strategy by integrating product analytics into how they make everyday decisions. And then third, they are results oriented. They use a system of measurement to rapidly experiment, killing bad bets and doubling down on the right ones. So vision, strategy, and results, something that I believe are really the core ingredients of being a great product-led company. And so our presentation today is actually going to be walking through each of these. And so we'll start with the first, which is that all product-led companies create clarity, and that really starts with vision. Every conversation about strategy has to start here. I fundamentally believe that you can't have a winning strategy if you don't know where you're going. And so let's talk about what is vision. And so the definition that I like to use, there's lots of them out there, but the definition that I like to use for vision is the measurable world we want to create. So what is that? Well, as I said, vision, this is important. So it's important enough we should actually take the time to unpack this, because if we're going to get this piece wrong, then honestly, nothing else will matter. You'll see there's 2 parts to this statement. There's measurable and then the world we want to create. And so let's start with that world we want to create. And so as a product leader, how do we articulate the world that we want to create? To do that, I'm going to bring up a story about Mario. Now, at this stage, you might be thinking to yourself, what does some Nintendo character have to do with product vision? And that's fair, but hear me out. This is actually one of my favorite analogies for building product. I think it actually perfectly captures my belief on what a great product vision is. So if you haven't seen this before, let's walk through it. So on the left, you've got Mario, who represents the customer. And in the middle, you have the flower, which is representing our product. And on the right, you have Fire Mario. And this represents the customer after using your product. Now, most people think that product vision is all about the flower, the product, but it's not. Product vision is actually about the customer and how much more awesome they're going to be when they use your product. It's about Fire Mario. Okay, but enough about arcade characters. Let's talk about a real world example of what this looks like. So we'll use a really, really popular product. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Spotify. Let's talk a little bit about their product vision. I actually think it's one of the more compelling visions that I've seen. And as we said, to paint a great vision, you first really have to understand the pain of your existing customer. You got to understand that, Mario. And so let's pull up Spotify's product vision. And let's see if we can actually see that in the vision. So their vision, give people access to all the music they want, all the time, in a completely legal and accessible way. So let's see if we can find the pain within this statement. So first, all the music. It's not just what you own, all the time, not just when it's randomly played on the radio. Legal, not having to worry about torrents or the dark web, and accessible on all devices at a cost-efficient manner. Okay, so that's a great vision. I'm sure some of you are thinking, wait a second, I thought this was a presentation about analytics. We've been talking about Mario and vision and all these things. What does this have to do? Well, don't worry. I run product in an analytics company. The data is coming for sure. So, but all jokes aside, this is actually a really important point. Because the data will never be all of the story. Remember, at the beginning, we talked about product is both an art and a science. But let's get to that science part, because the science is really, really crucial. And it's obviously something that that we care a lot about at Amplitude. And so let's actually go back to our vision statement. And so we said, right, what do we want to create? But also, how will we know if we're on the right path? And that's where the measurable part comes in to the vision. And so with this, we're going to introduce our next framework. So this is the concept of a North Star metric. So I'm sure, hopefully, most people here are familiar with the concept of a North Star. If you're not familiar with that, we'll go through it next. So what is the North Star? So the North Star metric is what helps us go from the vision to the strategy. It's the guiding light that we will be able to tie to our overall product strategy and know if we're going in the right direction. And so how do we define what a great North Star is? So we've worked with thousands of companies to help them define their North Star. And what we found through that experience is that there are a few key steps that every company needs to go through to figure out what a great North Star metric is for them. So the first is you need to define your type of product, because you have to understand the game that you are playing. The second is then you need to think about what are the leading indicators of success? What does it mean to win the game? And then finally, how do you break those down further into some of the systematic metrics? What are which we really call the rules of the game? So let's start with each of those. So we'll begin with the game. So what does it mean to define the game that you're playing? Well, this is really crucial because you don't want to be caught playing checkers when everyone else in your industry is playing chess. And so this is all about having a great understanding of your business. What are you trying to maximize? What are you willing to trade off in order to win? And so having an understanding of the game you're playing means that you can have a North Star metric that is then an accurate reflection of how you're going to win and an accurate reflection of real customer value. Because at the end of the day, you're going to win because you create a product experience that customers love. Having worked with thousands of different companies, we've seen in general, most companies can get boxed into like one of three different types of games. Either the game of attention, the game of transaction, or the game of productivity. So let's go through each and see if you can think about within your own product and your own company, kind of which game you think you're playing. We'll start with the game of attention. And so to think about attention products, these are the ones that are trying to maximize the amount of time that your users are spending with your product. And so examples of North Star metrics for these kind of companies might be number of subscribers that are streaming more than 60 hours a month, or it could be number of stories viewed per day. So what are examples of companies that are playing the game of attention? Well, we've got a handful here. These are ones that actually I've had the opportunity to work with at Amplitude, like NBC and Peloton. Obviously, lots of others out there as well. So that's the game of attention. Next, we have the game of transaction. So to think about this, think transactional products. They're the ones in which users derive value from the product by engaging in some sort of transaction. And so companies here might have North Star metrics that reflect various conversions, like maybe number of purchases completed, or average number of purchasers per subscriber. Like those are examples of things that you might see here. And companies, as you might have guessed, you're going to see a lot of retail e-commerce companies, right? They're the ones that are going to be playing the game of transaction. And then finally, we have the game of productivity. So productivity products are the ones in which customers derive value by accomplishing various tasks or sets of tasks within the product. And so companies here, kind of the North Star metrics you might see, typically they're going to reflect how well or efficiently their users accomplish those tasks. So it could be things like number of queries executed, number of records created, or tasks completed. And the types of companies you're going to see here, not surprisingly, you're going to see a lot of B2B companies playing this game, including Amplitude as an example of that. And so, exactly. So Amplitude is a productivity company. Would love to hear people throw in the chat what kind of game they think they're playing. And just so we can get a sense of the types of products and companies that we're building. And as we're doing that and people are throwing that in the chat, one of the things that you might have noticed is that while the game helps you define the type of space that you're playing in, it actually doesn't mean that everyone has the same North Star metric. We actually saw that there were different North Star metrics for companies that were even in the same game. And so that's really critical as well, because the game will give you kind of that defining boundary, but then you got to figure out within your game, how are you going to win? How are you going to ultimately beat the other players that are playing your game? And so that's how you figure out your specific North Star. And so once again, as you can imagine, we've got some advice on how to actually come up with your North Star metric. And so there are a couple things here. First and foremost, it needs to be a measure of customer value. This is really important. So viewing an ad is not a good North Star metric, because that's not customer value. That's business value, which obviously is super important, but we got to start with the customer. Remember, we want to think about how are we creating customer experiences that customers love. So first off, customer value. Second, it needs to reflect your strategy to ultimately deliver your vision, right? So we want it to be, once again, grounded in what is your fire, Mario, and what are the strategies that you're going to take to ultimately win the game. And then finally, we want it to be a leading indicator of revenue, not necessarily revenue itself, but be a driver of that, because you're trying to think about how do you create long-term value, lifetime value for your customers and business. And so those are the types of things that we want to focus in on. Now, across all this, one thing that is very clear that you should not have as a North Star is a vanity metric. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a vanity metric, I'll go ahead and explain that next. So a vanity metric is a top of funnel metric that doesn't really reflect the value to your customer. So examples of this would be things like traffic, page views, app opens. Those are the most common vanity metrics that I see. And yes, you definitely want to measure those, but if you're optimizing for them, you're not going to win the game. And so instead, what we recommend is diving much deeper into the funnel to understand what truly drives behavior. One of my favorite customer examples of this is a company called Postmates. They're a delivery company, recently got acquired by Uber. And for them, they track their funnel from app install, right? So definitely at the top, to then open, to people searching, converting, making a purchase, and then the purchase getting delivered. But none of those are their North Star metric. Instead, their North Star metric is happy deliveries. So it's still not just that they got delivered, but deliveries that were delivered on time, so within the window that they stated, with 0 issues. And they found through Amplitude that those deliveries led to extremely high retention and therefore high lifetime value. And so they set that as the North Star metric for their product. Okay, so let's apply this back to our real world examples. Let's go back to Spotify. And let's see if we could figure out what the North Star metric might be for them. So to start, let's actually start at the top. So what does the Spotify CEO, Daniel Ek, what does he care about? So go ahead, throw it in the chat. What do you think? What do you think Daniel thinks about and cares about? What's the thing that he's really trying to drive? See if anyone's got any good guesses here. Getting more users, that's great. Experience on list, that's great. I love it. We're all product folks, which is awesome. I'll tell you the number one thing that Daniel cares about and every CEO cares about is revenue. That's the thing that matters the most to him. But as we said, that's not a great North Star because we need to figure out how is the product going to drive revenue, right? And how do we ensure that our customers are happy? Because the customer does not care about how much revenue Spotify makes. I can guarantee you that. The customer cares about getting a great experience. And so as product leaders, it's our job to ensure that we deliver that, which then delivers revenue for the company. But to figure that out, we need to understand how does Spotify make money? And so let's actually take a look at that. So how do we think about translating revenue to the North Star metric? Well, for Spotify, there are 2 main ways that they make money, at least when they initially came out. I know they've got a much broader set of products now, but think about a few years ago. There's basically premium subscriptions and then ads that supported their free service. So any guesses as to which one of these 2 they make more money on? You can go ahead and throw it in the chat if you have any guesses. Yeah, so people have seen a good, it's actually not obvious from first cut, but actually when you look at their filings, so you actually see it actually is quite on the premium side. That makes up the lion's share of their revenue. And then when you look at something like listener hours per month, that is also heavily weighted towards subscriptions. And so that's really important information, obviously, that we'd want to know if we were a product leader at Spotify, for instance, thinking about what the company strategy is. And so using that information, what might be a good North Star metric for Spotify? So let's think about it. And here might be a good starting point. So time spent by subscribers listening to music. So I actually don't know what the North Star metric is for Spotify, but this would be my best guess given the information that I have. And then we can actually go through our checklist to see how that measures up. So the first would be, is it a reflection of customer value? I'd say yes. I definitely think it's a reflection of customer value. Listening to music, super critical, no question. Is it aligned with the product vision? Go back to that product vision for Spotify, 100%. Definitely aligned with that product vision. And then, is it a leading indicator of revenue? Well, as we saw, subscriptions are driving revenue, so it's definitely a leading indicator. And so it seems like this could be a pretty good North Star metric for Spotify. Okay, great. So now that we've defined the measurable world we want to create, we now need to figure out how are we going to accomplish this? So think back to Spotify. There are so many tactics that would lead them to increase time spent listening to music. And so this is why we need a strategy to make sure we're all aligned on how we're going to get there, right? And so strategy really is about the path to deliver on that product vision. And so what we have found is the best way to really think about developing a strategy is really to break down the drivers of your North Star metric. And so what does it mean to break down the North Star metric? Well, what we have found, once again, working with tons of different companies, is that all North Star metrics really are a function of a handful of different drivers. And so those drivers typically are either breadth, so how many active or returning users are there that are performing your action of value, depth, which is what is the extent of their engagement, frequency, how often are those users engaging or performing the action of value, and then efficiency, how quickly does it take the users to be able to achieve that value. So let's test this against Spotify. So go back to Spotify. And once again, we said, so North Star metric, time spent by subscribers listening to music. Let's see if we can break that down into some of these components. And so we can start with trial users, right? So number of premium subscribers might be what the North Star metric drivers are for them. We can look at on the depth side, we can look at content engagement. And here we might see something like number of hours spent, like could be potentially the North Star metric. And then finally on listening frequency, perhaps it's something like number of sessions per week. And so these potentially could be the drivers of the business for Spotify, the driver of their North Star metric. And therefore, you can actually think about how you create a strategy that drives that. Okay, so to talk about that, let's actually use another example. We talked about Spotify for a while. So we'll come up with another company probably people are familiar with. And so this one will be Netflix. And so how does Netflix think about their product strategy? But we're not going to talk about this version of Netflix. We're actually going to talk about this version. So this is the version of Netflix way back in the day. We're talking 12, 15 years ago. And so imagine going all the way back into the kind of mid 2000s. And so Netflix back then, what they cared about was actually DVDs. Some people may not even remember DVDs, but so that was how we watched content back in the day. And so put yourself back in that mindset. And then let's see if we can actually come up with what the North Star metric and the strategy for Netflix might have been. Okay, so first question, what game is Netflix playing? So go throw it in the chat. I'm sure people can guess. So tell me what's the game of, is it attention, transaction, or productivity? What's the game that you're playing? You're seeing Netflix. So correct, yeah. So it's definitely the game of attention. Awesome, we got that, which is great. So then what do we think their North Star metric might be? And so in this case, I actually happen to know what it is. I know the guy that ran product for Netflix back then. And so I actually asked him. And so he said that their North Star metric was number of subscribers. Now, as we said, that's great, but you can't just give a product team a goal of number of subscribers and then let them run, because then there could be lots of different ways you could do that. And so everyone's running in different directions, but you really want to be targeted in terms of your strategy. And so one of the things that they discovered that was a really key indicator for them of growth was actually retention. So monthly retention was one of those big indicators of leading indicators for number of subscribers. And so did the head of product then just go tell all his product teams, go figure out how to increase retention? No, because then you have the same thing. Lots of ways to increase retention. And honestly, retention itself is still even a lagging indicator of the efforts of the team, because it takes a long time to change a retention metric. And so they then broke that down even further. And they found that a depth metric was actually the leading indicator of retention. And so that was basically the number of DVDs in the queue. So there was this, it's kind of crazy to think back then, but actually you couldn't just order DVDs and get them all. There was actually a queue of DVDs that then would get delivered to you. And so they found that if they could get a user to have 3 DVDs in their queue, that would hit an inflection point. And when they discovered this, they were at 60%. And so they really focused on how to actually drive this number up. And over a period of a couple of years, they are able to get that to over 90% for their user base. And by doing that, they got their monthly retention from 92 to 98%. And when you talk to the VP of product back then, he actually believes this is one of the most important things that that company has ever done to actually get to the state that they're in. And it really came back to understanding the drivers of their North Star. This is what we call the power of analytics. Understand that there is an ultimate its key driver, the leading indicators, and the input metrics related to those. So this really helps you drive your product strategy, drive a organization. And not surprisingly, at Amplitude, we do this as well. And so talk a little bit about us. So at Amplitude, our North Star metric is a weekly learning user. So what does that mean? It's a user who gets an insight. So maybe creates a chart, for example, and then they share that with others, and that is consumed by 2 or more other people. So for us, that really reflects the value you got. It's not just about running queries. It's about the fact that you actually got to something worthy of sharing and then actually influencing the rest of your organization. So for us, so that's our North Star metric, a weekly learning user. And then we break that down into its drivers. So we look at breadth. So how many users are retaining? We look at depth. How many users are actively saving? And we also look at efficiency. How long does it take to get there? And then these are the North Star metrics for different teams. We call them pillars. And then each of those pillars have leading indicators that they're then focused on, like maybe number of new users engaging in consumption, and on and on. Okay, so we're coming down to the home stretch. We got our product vision, the North Star metric that guides us there. We got our product strategy, the underlying drivers of impact. So now we got to figure out, how do we know if the strategy is working? So that gets us to our third pillar. Are we measuring results, killing the bad experiments, and doubling down on those that are working? And to do that, we need to objectively measure our progress. So there's lots of ways to do this, but the most common technique that I've seen for doing this is probably something that a number of you are familiar with. It's the concept of an OKR. If you're not familiar with OKRs, definitely recommend reading John Doerr's book on it. Came out a couple years ago. It walks through the history of OKRs from their origination by Andy Grove at Intel, and then to their use at Google, where John talks about how that was one of the biggest things that actually got Google to success, was the adoption of OKRs. Now, OKRs are used in a lot of different functions outside of product as well. But what I want to talk about specifically is how they're used in product, because I've actually seen them used incorrectly a number of times. And so I want to make sure that people understand the right ways and the wrong ways to apply OKRs. Okay, how to apply OKRs towards product development, where there are definitely 3 learnings that I've had here. The first is that they're called OKRs, not KROs, for a reason. We'll talk about why. The second is really understand the difference between input, output, and outcome metrics. And then finally, when you're benchmarking your OKRs, you got to do it based on the game that you're playing. Okay, so let's go through each of these. First, OKRs, not KROs. Okay, so there's a reason that we've spent the past 20 plus minutes talking about vision and strategy. Way too often, I see product teams that overemphasize metrics without vision. And that means that they end up optimizing short-term gains, but they create long-term problems for themselves. I think no industry is more evident of this happening than actually the gaming industry. It's an industry that I was in. I happened to run a gaming company before I joined Amplitude. And it's definitely something that I see happen time and time again within that industry. I'm going to give an example here. So anyone have a guess as to whose stock price this is? Any guesses here? The clue is that they're in the gaming industry. They're kind of the GameStop. Yeah, not yet, but that's a great guess. Yeah, I saw there. So this is Zynga. Now, I want to be clear. Personally, I have a lot of respect for Zynga, as they really paved a lot of the analytics and product analytics, the things that we're talking about in terms of product analytics. A lot of their thinking we use today, but I do think there's a lesson learned here which is that if you take it to the extreme, you'll end up with a product that is a series of addiction tactics and growth hacks. And so it's really important. Remember, it is vision, strategy, and then results. So remember, vision, strategy, those are your objectives, then results. And so when you use KRs, it's really about measuring how you're progressing against the plan. So that's a super important learning that I've had from folks who use OKRs. Second, know the difference between input, output, and outcome OKRs. So here's my definitions for each of them. So I think about inputs. These are the activities. So these are things like user testing, maybe creating mocks, and they're all required work, but in and of themselves don't mean you hit your goal. The second are output. So think about output goals. This is the actual feature itself. This really is the flower in our Mario analogy. And obviously these are critical as well. Like if you're not shipping features, then you're not going to create impact. But if you just start those two, you're not going to actually know if you're creating customer value. Remember, because your customers don't care about you shipping features. They want to actually have features that solve the problems that they care about or create the outcomes that matter to them. And so that's why you then have to have third, the outcome metrics. So these are the reflections of the customer benefit, their success using your product. These are all the things about the North Star metrics and everything that we've talked about. And so what I've seen is that there's way too many teams that just think about the inputs and the outputs. This is a classic example of the feature factory, something a good buddy of mine, John Cutler, came up with. And so it's something that it's really important that you actually remember, we got to start from the customer, start from the outcome, what's the vision? And so you really need to have all three if you're going to accomplish your goal. And that's why outcome metrics are so important to have within your organization. Okay, so finally, talked about benchmarking. So you got to make sure you really take the game you're playing into account when you set these goals. So let's take frequency as an example metric. And so one of the most common ways that people measure frequency is actually DAO mount. I'm sure people here are familiar with that. So out of your monthly actives, how many of them were daily? And when Facebook came out, they actually reported their DAO MAU, and it was 60%. So 60% of their monthly actives were using their product every single day. And when they reported this metric, this became the benchmark that just about every product launched after Facebook was held against. Now, this is super impressive for Facebook, no question. And in the game they're playing, actually was one of the biggest drivers. But the fact that every product got benchmarked against this is kind of ridiculous for a couple reasons. One, a little technical, but DAO mount isn't actually the best way to measure frequency. I'm happy to talk about that different point in time. But also because VCs weren't taking the game into account when they measured everyone about this. And so I'll give an example. So let's say, I'm pitching you, you're a VC, and I came to you, I was like, I got a 30% DAO mount ratio. You're like, does that sound like a decent business? And you'd probably say, no, Facebook has twice the DAO mount. So I'm only looking for companies that are super highly sticky. And then what if I told you that actually that business was Amazon's DAO mount for their e-commerce business? Then you might think differently. 30% of monthly actives shop every single day on Amazon. That is an incredible business. And so that's why it is so important to benchmark based on the game that you're playing. Okay, so how do we bring this all together? So at Amplitude, let's see, it's on my screen. So at Amplitude, we call this our product charter. So this is our organizing document to help create clarity for everyone. Not surprisingly, it involves all three parts of this: vision, strategy, results. It also has some other pieces, so I didn't go through everything today. But here's actually an example of it looked like what it looks like. I think the next slide I have one from 2018. Yeah, so here's one from a couple years ago. And each swim lane then creates their own whenever they refresh their strategy and tactics. So the broader point here is it's not about the template. So sure, you're happy to copy this, but it's actually about the fact that we took the time to create the clarity around this. It honestly doesn't really matter what template or what you use. It's you're spending the time to actually talk about each of these things, and then you're putting it into some documents so that everyone can reference that. That's really the value. And so if you went off and created this by yourself and didn't share it with anyone, I guarantee you'd see no results. But if you actually took the time to go through these conversations with PM, design, engineering, your business partners, right, and then clarify that, have the debate, that will create tremendous impact. I guarantee it, because I have seen it happen multiple times. Awesome. Okay. So in conclusion, there are 3 things that we believe the best product companies in the world, the product-led companies, all do. They set a vision that creates clarity by using a clear, measurable North Star. They set strategy by integrating product analytics into their everyday decisions. And then finally, they are results-oriented. They use a system of measurement to rapidly experiment, killing the bad bets and doubling down on the right ones. Awesome. Okay, with that, I think we are done. So thank you. I think at this stage, might be opening up for a few questions. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the presentation, got some great insights and things that they can take back with them as they're building out their product.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Justin. This was an amazing session. Lots of takeaways from me personally. And love that you brought in some real world analogies with Netflix, Spotify, and even the memes and Mario examples were on point. So thanks for that. We'll jump right into the questions. We have a couple of questions with us. So, by the way, we are also live on YouTube, so a lot of questions coming in from there as well. The first question that I had was, how does one get better at product strategy? Suppose I'm a budding product manager. I see a lot of theory around product strategy, but what are some actionable things I can do to get better at it?
Yeah. So a couple things I think that I'd suggest. One, the first thing I'd probably ask is, what is the domain you're coming from? Because there's so many different types of product leaders. And so I always like to understand, like, are you coming from a technology kind of engineering background, a design background, or like a business background? Let's assume that for the sake of this, that you're not coming from a business background, because that's probably where I get this question most frequently. In that case, it is actually tell people to really lean in onto the business side, which is to actually spend a lot of time understanding your own company strategy. Another thing I suggest is actually go read the S1s of companies that are going public, because they'll actually articulate their business and product strategy in their S1. They actually spend a lot of time doing it. I happen to know that because we actually recently announced our that we filed, and so I actually wrote a good portion of our S1, and you spend a lot of time articulating it. And so I actually think that's a great way to learn strategies, to actually go take that time to do that. The other advice is just it's iterations, it's practices. It's having that conversation with your leaders and actually getting pulled in, because it's just you're going to get it through just number of reps. Like at the end of the day, it's just like anything else. And so the advice there would be, and something I give advice to all budding product leaders I talk to, is, so you have your swim lane, and so you're always obviously thinking about your strategy. Click that up a level. Think about your peers, and actually think about what might the strategy be for you plus all of your peers, because that's then what your boss, they're thinking that, and so that'll allow you to engage in a higher level conversation. And so that would be the other probably advice that I would give for that question. I see questions on what's an S1. So S1 is the very first filing that you give to the SEC if you're going public within the US stock exchanges. And so if you just Google a company's name in S1, like you can do like Asana S1 or like Slack S1, then you'll see it's actually a public document that talks about the company's strategy, as well as, and it always covers product strategy as well.
Absolutely. S1s are like a gold mine of product insights, and like you said, a great way to learn about strategy. I think Shalini has a question.
Yeah. So the next question is, can a company have multiple North Star metrics, like playing both game of attention and game of transaction?
Yeah, so a company can have multiple North Star metrics. So a couple of things. So ideally, the ideal situation is you have only one, because that creates focus and clarity. But the reality is it's not always going to be the case. Some of the examples where I see more than one, multi-product companies, that's definitely an example. So if you have a B2B and a B2C part of your business, like if the strategies and if actually the vision's different and the strategies are different, then you're going to have different North Stars. If you have a single product that happens to combine like two games, so it's like it's both attention with some e-commerce, like in gaming, that's a classic example of it, where you're selling IAP, but then you want attention. I think in those situations, it's best to actually create the clarity. What's more important? And so, because that's a really hard and difficult conversation. And I guarantee you that if it's not clear to you, it's not going to be clear to the rest of the company. And so you want to have those debates, because once again, the whole point of this is creating clarity. And so that conversation is really critical. So that would be my advice. If it's not clear to you which one, which direction you should lean.
Awesome. The next question is, since a lot of early stage founders also joining in, I think. So especially when a company is in a hyper growth stage and the business objectives and the goals are constantly changing. So how do you optimize the North Star metric to align with that? How often does one change the North Star metric, or how does one linearly progress as their company grows?
Yeah, exactly. So I think about that's the time frames that can change. And so North Star measures can definitely change. They changed at Amplitude. So when we started Amplitude, our North Star metric was a weekly querying user, because we were actually all about power users. And it was about, so we want to get power users, be able to do a ton of queries, and that's what we focused on. And then as we grew and the value we're delivering to companies changed, we realized that actually within larger organizations, we didn't want to have a single player product. We wanted to be multiplayer, because teams build product. And so that's when we shifted our North Star to be a weekly learning user. And so, yes, it very much can change. If you're super early, it could change. I mean, if you have a major pivot, it's obviously going to change. And so it's really, you have to think back to going back to, is your vision changed? Is your strategy shifting? Like, those are the things that you want to think about. And then you want your North Star metric to reflect that.
Perfect. Thanks. Shalini?
Yeah. So the next question is, some metrics can take some time to show their results, like for especially for the smaller features. So how do you define the time period and frequency at which those metrics should be evaluated?
Yeah, so that's the concept of the lagging indicator. So you've probably heard me talk a lot about, like, some metrics do take a while to change. And also, some products have larger user bases than others as well. And so it might take longer to get signal on a metric. I think that is really important to take into account. And then what I really then think about, like, what are the leading indicators of that? Right. So I'm always thinking about what are the drivers of the thing. And so for any feature, typically there is some reflection of just people using the feature. Like, that's always the base level. Like, that's the most leading indicator you can get, is, are people actually using it? And most people are pretty good about, like, setting goals on that. And if not, you got to start there, like, get the basics right. But what I typically then ask people to do is to then think about, so if people use your feature, what's the outcome that happens because of that? Because we're not, like, just using the feature. What does that end up creating? And so that then ends up being a good kind of lagging indicator for that feature user. And you can actually do that backwards. So, like, obviously the way I told it was start at the top and then go all the way down. You can do the exact same thing backwards, and you should. So if you're just working on a feature within a Scrum team, can you take the thing you're doing and run it all the way up? And if you can't, then there's some disconnecting that's happening, or if it's not clear. And then once again, you should be talking about that as a leadership group, because you want that clarity that you understand how your feature is driving the ultimate outcome for the company.
Yep, thanks for that. Now, this is a question that I was personally interested in, since you have built a gaming company, and I know that from my limited interactions with PMs from gaming companies, those are like gold mines for using data to create experiences. Like, because you're at every point you are looking at data and trying to optimize for the best experiences, creating levels, and gamifying the entire experience. Would love to know some insights from that journey, like pertaining to product strategy, but otherwise also would love to know how your journey was and what are some key insights from that.
Yeah, so I think if you are interested in getting really strong on analytics, then I think gaming is by far the best industry to do it in. And so that was even related to my path. So I have a background in analytics. And early in my product career, I was actually quite interested in then thinking about how do I apply analytics to the world of product. And gaming was the perfect place to actually do that. And so going even all the way back to that original question of like, where are you coming from in terms of your path into product? If your path is actually from a data science and analytics perspective, which it was for me, then gaming or any companies that are really, really driving metrics strongly are great places to start. Go get a product analytics role, and eventually you can become a great product leader that way. That was what my path was. And then I think, for me, like, because I have such a strong data background, it was always easy to take the data side. I think the thing that has made me a really strong product leader is because I also developed very strong user empathy. I really credit my design partners in really driving that for me. And so that then creates this great combo where I can come up with insights through looking at the data, but then actually see what's the why behind that by talking to users. And a lot of times you come up with an insight, but it's actually not really an insight. It was actually just correlational and there was no causal driver. And then other times you actually figure out something is causal. You go and talk to users, and you figure that out. And that then has huge impact on product strategy because now you're really getting a full picture. And that's the role that analytics plus the qualitative can provide when you combine both.
Awesome. So we have our next question. How do you decide whether your company needs to have a central product and analytics team, or whether every function needs to have their own product and analytics teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at scale, you're going to have both. You're going to, like, at a large company scale, you're going to have a centralized team where their role is really about governance across the organization, ensuring that every organization has the data that they need, and you're also reporting consistently off the same metrics. And so that will be the role of the centralized team. And then you're going to have operational teams that have their own analytics as well, because you've got to have the fast decision making. A world of both actually, or sorry, only one but not the other. Actually, it won't scale. So I know that. So at the end state, it's going to have both. So then the question really is, how do you know which one goes first? I might be biased because I actually work in, I'm in the world of operational analytics, but I actually think it's better to start with the operational analytics, because at the end of the day, that's about empowering the people that need to make decisions today to do that. And so what I have seen is companies that start with the centralized, you end up then getting the concept of the data breadline, where sure, one analyst or a team of analysts might be able to keep up in the very beginning, but eventually they won't. And then you're going to ask a question. It's going to take 2 weeks to get the answer. And this is where then problems happen. So then what will happen, the first 2 times you'll ask the question, you'll eventually get it. The third time, you'll be like, this is just taking too long. So I'll just make my best guess. And the moment you get into that world where you're just making best guesses, like, then you're going to get in trouble. And so I've found that if you start with strong operational analytics, like buying a product analytics product, you won't get into this. Everyone will continue to make sure they're always using data. And then eventually you'll need governance because it's going to scale. And that's something we actually help our customers with because we've seen it and actually can help them then set up the more centralized environment as well.
Great. So next question is, since you're a product leader yourself, and I'm sure you must be working with a lot of different product managers and different product teams, how does one become better as a product manager and measure it? Like we all measure the products and help it grow. How does a product manager measure themselves and grow in their careers? What metrics or what pointer should one look at, or what North Star should one consider to grow in their careers as a product manager?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I think you can apply the same methodology that we just described to how you think about your own career. And in many ways, thinking about your career as a product, like, makes a ton of sense. And so starting with the vision, which is like, what is the thing that you really care about? And, when you're early in your career, you may not know the answer to that. And that's completely fine. I think it's actually good to get a breadth of experiences to figure that out. I think, the example, what that is for myself, kind of what my North Star is, something I've realized is I really enjoy helping people make better decisions through data. that has been something that has just been consistent. And in the first half of my career, that meant I was a consultant. In the second half of my career, that happened to be in product. And I kind of lucked into product and discovering that. And I really just fell in love with helping make people better decisions in product. And hence, why I love being at Amplitude. And so start with your vision. I think that's always important. And then, yeah, like I do the same types of things here as then like I think about outcomes at a year-long basis. Where do I want to get better? At the stage I'm at now, I think about how do I help my team and my organization get better. So those are the things that I'm thinking about. And then, yeah, set goals. Like, what does that look like 3 months from now? And then I actually I kick off every single week. I go back to, I call it my intentions list. So I actually go back to that list. I go through what are my goals for the quarter, and then what's the most important thing I can do this week. Well, obviously every week I got tons of things to do, but I always write out what is the most important thing. If this thing did not get done or did not get accomplished this week, that would be really bad. So I always know that's my North Star for the week. So that I always make sure I'm driving that forward. And obviously there's always a ton of more things. But I think having that clarity is really, really valuable.
Awesome, awesome. I know you have a hard stop right now, in a few minutes, so we'll end the questions for now. But before that, we usually do a short rapid fire round that we ask three quick questions, and you can answer them in brief. They are usually uh, short questions with short answers. So get to get started with that. The first question is, what are three books that PMs should refer to get better at product analytics or strategy? This is one of the questions that came up multiple times in chat as well. So would love to know what are some books that you go towards. I know you mentioned Measure What Matters in the deck, but what are some other good books?
Yeah, so that's one. So Dan Olson has a great book. I actually don't remember the name of his book, but I've known Dan for a number of years, and so he's got a great book. So people could probably Google that. And then actually, so I actually ended up with some of my partners at Amplitude very early on. We wrote a playbook called the Product Analytics Playbook, Mastering Retention. We've now written a number of playbooks after that. We've got one on the North Star, but that first one on measuring retention, if you really want to get deep into understanding how to actually think about retention as a metric, I actually think it's quite a good book on that. And so I might recommend people check that out.
Amazing. Next question. Three folks you would like to give a shout out to. These might be your mentors, colleagues, peers, or anyone you would like to give a shout out to, since a lot of PMs are watching right now. Maybe they'll find them interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see. Well, I mentioned Dan Olson, so he's a great one. Someone who's a mentor for me, actually on the art of product development side, is this guy named Joff Redfern, who's the VP of product at Atlassian. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this is actually just general advice for mentorship. Like, he is spectacular about thinking about, like I said, the art side. How do you build amazing teams? And so I've learned a lot from him. I think he's learned a lot from me on the analytics side, and so it's actually been a great relationship to build. So he would be another one. Let's see who else. Nir Ayal is also a really good friend of mine. So he wrote Hooked and Indistractable, and so I think that's also he's also a great overall leader in how to think about a lot of the concepts we're talking about here in product.
Awesome, awesome. All three are amazing folks, and everyone should definitely check out. They put out some really good content online as well, so definitely check that out. And last, and my favorite question from the rapid fire: what is one advice that you would like to give to 20-year-old Justin, or maybe 25, or
Yeah,
your younger self?
exactly. Yeah. Early Justin. So it actually has it's a little different than the stuff we were talking about. But I was thinking about this because I was just talking to our interns, and I got a very similar question. It actually would be really think about EQ and relationships and how important those are. I think when I was really young, I thought it was all about how smart you were. And like, that matters to a certain degree. But I've actually learned from so many different leaders that your ability to inspire others is actually how you create the most impact. It's not going to be about the decisions that you make, but how do you actually create an organization that makes better decisions and really inspire people and get people to to follow in where you want to go. And so that would be the advice that I'd give give early Justin to spend. I've luckily have had a lot of mentors who helped me see that, and so I have been able to get much better at that. But that's definitely one that I think was a great learning for me.
Absolutely. I think EQ is highly understated, and especially for PMs who work with different teams, different kinds of people, uh, that becomes even more relevant. With that, thanks a lot, Justin. Amazing deck, amazing presentation, and really insightful answers to all the questions that everyone had. Any closing remarks from your end? Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Are you active on LinkedIn, Twitter? Uh, where do people go to
Yeah, for
learn more
sure.
from you?
Yeah, 100%. So definitely you can check me out on, I'm probably more on LinkedIn now than Twitter, though I have my Twitter handle there, but you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And then, obviously, if you're interested in learning more about the things that we're talking about, Amplitude is a really great resource. I think we really invest a lot. You don't have to be a customer to get a lot of value. I obviously would love for you to become a customer as well. But even if you're not a customer yet, there's a lot of great value that we have on the blog and some of the things that we push out. So please do check those out.
Amazing. We are now at the end of the session. Thanks everyone for joining in, especially at a Friday night, and it's really late now in India. So thanks everyone for joining in. And Justin, super early for Justin, by the way. So really kind of him to make it for this session and share his learnings. Do make sure to check out Amplitude's product demo, and you can get started with the free trial and play around with the tool. If you have any questions, shoot them out on Twitter or their email. They'll definitely help you out. And for TPF, we have another exciting session coming up next weekend. We are hosting JMJ, was previously the VP of Revenue at Tinder, and he's now the founder of Chapter One. So we'll see you next weekend, and bye bye. Have a great weekend. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.